If you want to start or scale your property development business to 8 figures and beyond, then you're in the right place. This is the Property Experts podcast with Ben Richards and Jack Jiggins, two serial entrepreneurs bringing weekly insights from our award-winning businesses. In these podcasts, you'll learn how we found, funded and delivered over £80 million worth of property in the last 6 years, with templates you can use, deal analysis and deep dive discussions that will help you build your businesses successfully. We hope you'll enjoy. Hello. Welcome everyone to this week's episode of the Property Experts podcast with me, Ben Richards and Jack Jiggins. We have got a blistering episode today with a massive rant again around some sort of extortion this week that we have been faced with. And I'll come on to that more in a minute. But if you don't tune in regularly, welcome. If you are a regular, welcome even more. We love the repeat viewership and the questions that come in, so make sure you get your comments and questions down in the comments below as we progress, and we always have time for Q&A at the end so we can answer those questions on this very call. So it's not often you get a chance to ask award-winning serial entrepreneurs anything you absolutely want to ask around business, property, marketing, sales, anything you want for free. So make sure you drop your questions down below. We are XP Property. We aim to deliver 1,000 homes and £1 billion in property in the UK. And we do that by collaborating with trusted investors. A lot of people call us ambitious, transparent and creative. And that's how we try to do all of our businesses and how we, that's sort of some ethos that we live by in both business and in sort of personal lives as well. We raise funds to deploy into property investments and property developments like the ones you see on screen. And we have quite a few active open investments. So if you are a property investor or you're not a property investor yet, but you are interested in investing in property and diversifying into that asset class, then we would love to speak to you. We have investments open from £200,000 all the way up to £2.5 million, depending on the type of thing that you want to get involved in and the amount of cash that you want to deploy. So reach out to us. We've got office conversions, we've got HMO investments, we've got fixed return investments on completed assets and everything in between. So yeah, reach out if you're interested in discussing an investment with us. On today's agenda, it's the 7th of November, and we have point number one. A housing association this week has tried to hold us to ransom for an extortionate amount of money. So stay tuned to find out more about that. I'm going to be talking a little bit about land remediation relief. And then Jack is going to be feeding back all of the amazing lessons that he's learned at the Future of Development conference that Jack hosted this week. So loads of really interesting panelists from government, from education, from the property development sector. And he's going to be talking about two main things. That's an overview on the planning processes and what the Labour government are going to be doing in that space. And then an overview on how we are hoping to overhaul the construction industry as well. Jack and I have both been on a couple of podcasts this week, and we're going to be talking about some of the property investor awards that we've been part of, and we've won, and we've been judges on. We've been hosting interviews for our XP Surveys Measured Building Surveying company, and that business is also hosting an event. So definitely stay tuned to the end of this podcast to find out more about the event that we host almost every quarter now. Very, very well attended and lots of interesting people in the room. And then I'm giving you an update on our latest project in St Andrew's Court, Tame. I've literally just got back half an hour ago from site. It's looking really sharp. So find out the progress that we've made there and some of the learnings that we found out of that project. And as always, a Q&A at the end. Hi, Jack.
How are we doing? I've realised I was fully dripped out in
your golf gear. XP Surveys, nice. Rocking the XP Surveys stash. Cool. One thing that I've just realized that I've clicked and it's appeared on screen. This week on the 4th of November 2025, we are now officially 250,000 views on YouTube. So thank you very much to those that have been part of that $250,000 viewership. We want to grow that as fast as we can. And if you were tuning in back in the summer, I think in May this year, we hit our first something like 100,000. So in the last couple of months, that that time frame between 200, 225, 250 is getting closer and closer together, which means that more and more people are viewing and listening into our podcast, which is incredible. So if we can ask you to do just one thing, is share it in your property groups, share it with one person that you think would really get valuable advice and insight from these podcasts. And if you're not subscribed already, what are you waiting for? Click it down below right now on whatever platform you are listening in on, and drop us a thumbs up as well, because that always helps the algorithm. Cool. On to a shocking email that I had this week, where I actually, and I don't think I've told Jack this, but the process that we've been trying to go through on our old malting site has been very, very painful. You know, I've been pulling my hair out and banging my head against a brick wall to try and get progress with the neighboring property owner. So we bought this site from the neighboring property owner. They used to have their HQ in this office. It's a housing association. And they have a portfolio of properties surrounding the site that are part of their housing association portfolio. So we bought this office to convert it into residential, and ultimately we've already got a gas easement with them, and we wanted to ask them to provide an easement to run a new electrical service through their land. And this image on the right hand side, for those that are viewing it, is, I've highlighted it in yellow. Effectively, it's a side passage. It's actually a public right of way, but they own the land, and we have got the approval from SSEN and costings to bring our one of our new electrical services through their piece of land. And we've probably been discussing this for 4 months now. It's been back and forth. It's, you know, delayed in legals. Oh, legals are waiting on an instruction from their client, blah, blah, blah. We're trying to speak to the head of property at the housing association, won't return our calls, won't return our emails. Anyway, about a month ago, he responded back and said, we are reviewing this internally, and we are reviewing what the premium will be for agreeing this easement. And that's the first time that had been mentioned. And I thought, oh God, here we go. Like, they're going to ask us for 50 grand, 60 grand, whatever it may be. And, you know, ultimately at 20 grand, 30 grand, we probably would say, yeah, crack on, let's do it. Anyway, we had the email back this week, finally, with their initial proposal. Bearing in mind, we bought this site for £1.4 million from them about 2 years ago. They now would like £1.175 million to provide us the easement to bring an electrical cable through their land, which is ridiculous. And I actually, Jack, I typed out an email saying, yeah, no problem, let's crack on, let's move forward, let's get this into legals. And then I rechecked the email to see that it wasn't £1,175. Because I read it fast and thought, oh, 1,200 quid plus VAT. I mean, fucking, why have we gone back and forth for 4 months for 1,200 quid? And I'm glad I checked again. And then I saw the extra zero in the commas and was like, 1.175 million? Are you absolutely having a laugh? So we are now looking at alternative routes, obviously, and trying to figure out what to do going forward. There's a couple of options that we will have. I just thought it was ridiculous and extremely short-sighted from the housing association. You know, we do have other options. You know, they're missing out on probably a couple, you know, let's say 20 grand, 30 grand, whatever it may be that we can agree. You know, they're cutting their nose off to spite their face, really. I mean, there may be some negotiation just to go back and put a number to them, for example, and we haven't done that yet. I think my initial response was, this is ludicrous, I'll seek advice from my solicitors, was my sort of immediate response. Whereas you know, I'm sure at some point we'll just go back with a counter offer, and you know, it's not going to be anywhere near the level that they've come in at. But I mean, it just feels ridiculous. I mean, I think they're seeing it as a bit of a ransom strip. I mean, we're not landlocked. We've got other options to bring those cables in. This was just the easiest route that we saw and discussed with our utilities consultant. But I mean, they've wasted 4 months of our time. Well, they've wasted more than that, because there's been other issues that they've been slow to respond on. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has seen this before or had this type of extortion put to them by adjoining landowners. But yeah, seems absolutely ludicrous.
How phrase, isn't it? How holding someone by ransom. You know, they've got ransom land that we need. Fundamentally, if they don't come in more cost effective than other options we've got, we'll just explore the other options.
Yeah, exactly. So thought it was worthwhile talking about.
To give the listeners context, that we're literally talking like 40 meters through tarmac around their site.
I mean, the thing is,
1 million quid for that.
Yeah, about 6 months ago, they already dug up half of this route that we were trying to bring it in on to service a pumping station that they had to create a new electrical supply to. I mean, this is a joke of it, because when we took ownership of the site, we obviously cut off the electrics to undertake our strip out and start working on the project. And about 2 weeks after we started the strip out, we had them knocking on the door saying, you've cut the electrics to the pumping station on our land. I'm like, well, why are we supplying electricity to your pumping station? And we, of course, as good neighbours, spent $4,000 creating a temporary connection to get that Thames Water pumping station up and running whilst they sorted out their own connection. We've not seen £4,000 back from that, or any type of compensation. I did joke in the week that our retort to their figure should be, well, we want compensation for providing your electrics to your pumping station and street lamps, and it will be £1.175 million, please, and see what they say. Yeah, interesting sort of process that we're going through. I mean, stay tuned, I guess, to understand how that one unfolds. But it's a problem for us. It's a delay. We're already almost finished on 3/4 of this site. So to have half of our electrical supply now up in question, and we're having to find another solution, is just another thing to add to my to-do list that I could do without. But yeah, interesting nonetheless. Something else that's come up this week, we had a really good session last week on a commercial property tax that you should absolutely be taking advantage of. It's called capital allowances, and if you want to know more about that, then check out last week's episode, which is season 3, episode 44. But there's another tax hack which we are about to kind of secure on one of our other sites. It's land remediation relief. And what that is, we've had a couple of our Aura clients go through this process as well, where they've had to, they've knocked down an MOT garage, for example. There's oils and all sorts of stuff that's kind of in the ground, that's sort of sunk into the ground over the many years, and they need to dig it up and do what they need to do to build their new development on that site, for example. Well, land remediation relief effectively is a 150% tax relief on the money you spend on remediating that land for development purposes. Now, there's obviously lots of caveats to it, and again, seeking advice from a specialist who understands this relief, or your accountant if they've got experience with it. Is we are not accountants here, so seek your own advice. But ultimately, it is a very, very good way of softening the blow for unexpected remediation costs. And this is brought up on one of our sites because we had a £26,000 bill to remove about 1.5 square meters of asbestos from one of our sites. It was hazmat suits, it was ventilation, pumping air into these sort of, you see them on crime scenes where you're walking into this sort of see-through zipper, where you get sprayed down and all this sort of stuff. That's an expensive process, but we had to do that work to make it, safe to work on. So asbestos removal, contamination in soil. So if you've got to dig down 1.5 meters to remediate the land and remove any nasties within the ground, that is remediation of the land, and you can get remediation relief from a tax perspective on that, on those costs, to the tune of 150% of what those costs are. So it can be a significant saving. I know you've still got to spend that money up front, but ultimately, you get some relief with land remediation relief if you're going down that route. So yeah, if you're not aware of it, now you are. Speak to your accountant or speak to a specialist about it. How's FOD?
Special. So really, really, really good. Could definitely be a much, much bigger event. So the Developers Club, which I've been a member for 3.5 years, and Ben was a member for a period of time as well, is a collective of, it's a club for developers, and there are different tiers of groups, and I actually run the legacy group, which is kind of like you could call it top progressive group that you go in through the executives or the boards and then into the legacy. But I was fortunate enough to not only attend the Future of Development this year, which was held at Bayes Business School in central London, but I was also fortunate to host. And the reason why I wanted to talk through it today is the people that are there sharing their knowledge. We had a chancellor of a large council in London. We had a Labour member party who's as an advisory in property and real estate and planning. We had planning barrister, planning consultants. We had, this plethora of expertise, skills, and knowledge of political movements and changes in the market. And I learned so much about the sort of underlying rhetoric of where the country's going, what other people's views are on things from a planning and policy perspective. But then also there was a construction panel and a planning panel anyway. So I wanted to share with our listeners what I learned, because it's then a very efficient and condensed version of the day. Ben, are we going to shoot onto the planning slide first? Is it the planning?
Is there a planning
That's
slide?
fine. So from a construction perspective, we had Finbar from P4HB. We had someone that's part of the House Building Federation, who runs their own fourth generation development company called Car and Car. We had Alex Hearn from Horde. And we had we had Francesca Winslow, who's a SME private developer. And the questions were, what's happening in the market? What can we expect for the next 24 months? Is Labour going to change anything? We talked about modular and high-risk buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So I was trying to share as best as I can the sort of translation of that panel. So starting off with like costings, labour shortages and things like that. So unfortunately, obviously, labour in construction is one thing that is really difficult to implement technology, AI, systemization. In actual fact, construction is in the bottom 25 adopted industries for technology and AI. Sorry, just technology. This survey was carried out before AI. And I actually heard Elon Musk say in an interview with Joe Rogan on his podcast, highly recommend that podcast, by the way. It's a really, really good one. He talks about anything that's moving atoms is a really difficult thing to replace with AI. So anything that's like administration, document reading, document sifting, organization, systemizing tech, that's really easy to replace with AI. But anything moving atoms, and you can even see, if you're watching on this picture in front of us, there's a brick there. That's an atom. Moving that is difficult to integrate ATI and AI into that industry. So the stability of costs of materials and various things, a lot of the construction panel were all agreeing that costs to deliver things are more stable. They're high. Everyone's saying build costs are high. This is high. I completely agree. It's significantly higher than it was. The cost rises that we've seen over the last few years, realistically since COVID, and those supply issues has made it a lot more expensive to deliver stuff. We're probably delivering stuff 50% more expensive than we were 4 years ago, which is a significant increase in cost. That's not only the problem. Labour shortages is the problem. It's not a very attractive industry to go into: carpentry, plumbing, groundwork, machine work, or whatever it may be. And obviously the age of the UK is getting older. So the people that are on site, they're aging quite quickly. So a lot of our workforce in that sector are aging people that will need to retire. And guess where they live? They need houses. So the demand for housing is going to increase, and the labour shortages is a problem. But there's been positive spin, given the last 4 or 5 years that we've had, they had quite a positive view on material costs and getting stuff done. And we are now a country of major import and very little export. So we do rely on international trade. And obviously leaving the EU, I think, is probably stabilizing a bit more. So we had material shortages and every shortage during COVID. Then we had supply and demand issues because of COVID. Then we had Brexit, where significantly the costs change because we're out the EU and there's tariffs being charged and taxes being charged to do more import. and we're a massive import country. We don't produce enough of our own stuff. A stat that Finbar actually used is we require 4 billion bricks a year, and we only produce 3 billion in the UK. So that's an import of 1 billion bricks. And we do rely massively on import. But the general sentiment of the construction panel was stability and not massive hikes, like we've seen, is to be expected. And obviously the government wants to encourage build. So that kind of feeds down and trickles down into also the cost of materials anyway. One thing that we should be worried about is labor shortages. It's not easy finding the right labor. If you speak to any construction business, there's just not people going through college learning how to bricklay, learning how to plaster, learning how to work the electricals, learning how to, electricals and plumbing are quite popular because it's really well paid, but the other sectors of the market that are less attractive or appealing, that is a thing, and it's been a thing for decades now. Tony Pidgley built in his own apprenticeship program into the Berkeley Group, and we're not even anywhere touching the size for that skilled labour to come through. So general sentiment, material costs should stabilise, and labour shortages will still be an issue, but hopefully that's some good news.
Nice. Did you go through this?
I didn't realise this was the planning one as well. So planning wise,
yeah.
Actually, I was nowhere near finished on the construction one. Go back to the construction one. Modular was another topic.
Mm-hmm.
Modular, I feel, is kind of like, obviously, so I think there's 6 or 7 layers of modular construction, the consideration of modular construction, or as other people like to call it, modern methods of construction, which are not actually modern anymore. We've been doing these modular structures for 10 years. But essentially, the general consensus was that modular still hasn't paved the way to take the lead on traditional building. From the supposed value of modular is speed to put it on site and together, and also quality control because it's built in a factory and it's easier to control quality. The general consensus of the construction panel was that it's not as buzzwordy as it actually should be. It's not really much change or value there that can be presented or prove in this space. So it's still going to form part of construction. The part of the difficult for our perspective developers, especially when you're raising finance, is difficult to actually understand the payment structure of it, because they build the modular unit, so you need 50% of that minimum paid while they're building it in a factory. And how does your lender lend you that capital? Because there's a factory in Poland or in Edinburgh or in the Cotswolds or wherever it may be, and it's not on your site. So how do you pay for that? So then you're deflecting onto another balance sheet that could be another liability to bring in that modern method of construction and modular. When I actually walked around the Hills Group's site in East London, in Dagenham, they do modular bathrooms and also the basically like utilities cupboard. So they bring in a lot of stuff that they can control and basically plug it into the right places, which is really cool, really cost effective. But that isn't obviously the top level of modern methods of construction. So still kind of a bit of a buzzword, isn't integrated into our industry as well as it could be or can be, or maybe, if it's not broken, don't fix it. But that was the general consensus on that. Onto high-risk buildings. Now, we've talked about this before, so I believe, and don't hold me completely to this, but I believe if your building is either over 7 stories or alternatively 18 meters taller of living, you will fall into a high-risk building category. And one thing that was really interesting that Alex Horde said is he said that if the building, let's assume you own a 1-bed flat in a fairly high-rise building, like a 10-story building, and you want a building control application to convert that 1-bed flat into a 2-bed flat, you need to go through the gateways for high-risk building just for your 1-bed flat, which is absolutely absurd. So you can imagine.
Had to do that.
Sorry?
We've had to do that on a tower that was built by Berkeley Group 20 years ago in Vauxhall, where it's just an internal fit out or rearrangement of a 2-bedroom flat. But you have to go through the BSR
Crazy.
kind of route.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So I suppose the call out to anyone listening is if you do flat conversions or works on flats in high-rise buildings, potentially maybe even consider doing a set of works that don't require building control sign-off, that aren't really pushing that flat around so much, because that just sounds crazy to me, that level of detail. So to understand the high-risk building, building control law that's come in, essentially, if your building does fall into that sort of over 18 meters category, and this is all off the back of fire health and safety, is essentially you have to go through a completely independent process that's not the same as a standard building control, to ensure that there's means of escape, typically 2 fire cores. Obviously, you have to go through to nth degree level from a building cladding and various other things. But hugely arduous process. But the main reason that it's arduous is there's new gateways to jump through. So pre-planning, post-planning, post-construction, and pre-management. And those 4 gateways that I've mentioned, there might even be more, are just going to delay your project significantly longer than it typically would. So basically, the sentiment is avoid high-risk buildings, was essentially it. Cool. We can go on to planning now. So we had a really interesting panel, actually. I asked the panelists to say a fun fact about themselves, and we had 3 planning consultants and 1 planning barrister on there. And it was actually the 4 funnest facts that I've ever heard on a panel.
Can you repeat any of them?
One of them was one flies a plane in his spare time. Another one could put his feet behind his head, which was a good one. They're quite comical, but yeah, trying to make a quite a dry panel quite fun was good fun, and they really lent into it. It was really good fun. But anyway, so the value that you can take away from it, and my summary from it, is Labour are looking to put more resources into planning. They've obviously set a target of 1.5 million pound 1.5 million pound homes in their term, which is a significant increase. We have been averaging between sort of 150 to 200k in housing delivery in the UK, and we're nowhere near that. What we need to be hitting, obviously, if we do 1.5 in a 4-year term, we need to be over doubling what we're already achieving. A lot of sites are stalled across London because of feasibility, and there's so many SIL, Section 106 fees, contributions, SANG, all of these various different fees that come in with planning, that there's boroughs that could hit their targets of housing, but they can't because the site is stalled, because the developer cannot basically the feasibility of the site is completely washed, and that is because there's too much taxation on it. So I think the councils take the stance to punish the developers. The developers are making the margin. Let's take what we can off them. But in reality, what happens is the free market just stops. They sit on sites, they land bank, they renegotiate, they stall the site. Or it changed hands or whatever it may be, because someone's like, well, I think I can negotiate that down. So essentially, overall, they just need to be more flexible and understand that lower fees promotes more building, which promotes more stamp duty and land tax, and brings in other fees and other capacities. The general consensus also of the panel was feeling sorry for planning officers because they're under-resourced and underfunded. And I do actually agree with that. I did actually kick back and sort of say that, why don't they charge more? That we have to spend £30,000 on surveys like proving that the air and sound and bats, are healthy in that area, but we spend 1,500 quid to giving the council to run the full application. It doesn't seem fairly weighted. There was talks about privatising some applications. And a lot of the panelists were actually pushing back on that. And I said, well, why then do you privatise potentially doing Section 106 agreements or feasibility studies? And I think it proves that if you put things into the free market, shit gets done, because they've got to be competitive on pricing. Otherwise, they don't win business. They've got to be efficient at running their operation. Otherwise, they don't make a profit. And then they can't pay staff. So a sustainable business model is typically, as much as we can, put stuff into the private sector as best we can.
What was their reluctance in general?
I think that there's almost like a grey cloud over privatization, just because it's pushing more money back into the private sector. But I mean, we it's a free country, so it's kind of like, yeah, of course they're going to say that, because from a planning consultant perspective, it is the dark side, right? Privatization and going into the private sector where you're charging per hour, you're probably on 100 grand a year if you're running your own firm, is the dark side. Whereas people should be getting into planning for passion and policy and, you know, all of that stuff. So I think it's just a drift to the dark side. I also think that when a private company like a planning consultancy are dealing with a private company like a development company, shit gets done and it's going to make them look bad. So I think there is an element of them probably just being an element of embarrassed. But just generally, they think that the structure is right. It just needs more people in it, which I would be. We only want to go private because they're shit at it. So, you know, why, if they were good, we wouldn't be thinking, oh, let's go private. This is such a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
There was also talks and actually a very positive outlook on even political and planning consultancies are trying to push AI as much as we can into general planning applications that could be approved without human eye looking over it. And that was quite a positive stance. There was also mention from a planning barrister who actually represents some councils called peers about zoning modeling, which is basically the US process. So in the US, you have bans around settlements, cities, and suburbs. So that basically there's almost like the easiest way that I could explain it is if there's principle of certain schemes that have been delivered in that area, they build zoning areas. And what that enables is almost like PD, where you have rights to do things in certain areas. And there was actually talks of they're probably going to take us. There was one planning consultant that believes that when another government comes into play, grey belt's going to actually be removed, which was interesting. But the zoning is kind of around that model. So you could zone certain areas going out of, you know, settlement boundaries where you could go, actually, you can build 1 unit or 2 units, or there's more infill rights outside of the settlement boundary, because our policy is settlement boundaries are small to prevent urban sprawl. But if you actually got a map and zoned areas out, you would unlock a lot more brownfield sites and development and infill and things like that. But the thing is, they're not supporting SME developers. So who's going to deliver that? Barratt are not going to buy a 2-plot unit. So there needs to be more movement of supporting smaller SME developers. I asked a question, which was, what did I ask? Something along the lines of, oh, that was it. I asked a Labour planning policy sort of advocate. So this is a political person. I said, why are they taxing privately owned landlords? Is it to move the money into professional or institutional buy-to-let? And his response was, I'll pass on that question. And I said back to him, I was like, I think that says more than you answering it. Because it means that yes. So, you know, are we moving more to this institutional model? Is Labour, you know, governing that? Hopefully not. The stats are that the SME developers 15 years ago used to deliver 40% of housing in the UK, and now it's only 10%. And interestingly, that Labour advocate actually said a really interesting stat. He said that 50% of development companies will go bust during this 4-year Labour term, judging on stats.
Wow.
Which is just crazy.
That's just ridiculous. And they want to build more houses.
Yeah.
Like, they just don't go together, right?
Yeah. And then last but not least, and then we can move on, is what was really refreshing is there is a councillor from a council on the panel, Venetia, lovely lady actually, and she was talking about from her angle. So she's pro-build. She's got 250 unit social housing sites that they're developing via the council. She wants to bring in more value into the pre-application process and speed that up, which I thought was quite refreshing. It did work quite well when it worked.
Yeah.
It just takes too long now. So it seems like there's a lot of it, you know, that Labour have put planning and housing at the forefront. It seems like everyone's getting more clued up on it and focusing on it. But we just need to see actions more than words, because it's all well and good saying we will deliver on 1.5 million homes. At the moment, I can't see how.
No, I think is it 3,800 starts in London in 2025, and their target was 28,000 or something.
Yeah.
It's staggering, the shortage of actual new build starts that have happened in even London, but around the UK.
Yeah.
I just brought Tara's comment up on screen because I thought it was worthwhile saying there is what's meant to be a more of a fast track planning route called a planning performance agreement, which is effectively the council saying that they will sign up to a strict time frame of decision on an application if you pay X amount of money. So you're basically paying for closer attention to your application. That's called a planning performance agreement. And she said here that that process is often privatized. This is going back to the discussion around privatizing the planning department. But there are some planning performance agreements now that are done by external third party private companies. We've had a couple of comments over the last 15 minutes. James Harrison asks, how much below market do you offer on houses suitable for HMOs? Struggling to find ones that stack. Do you do extensions on the back of them to be able to make them stack? Are you buying through auction? We'll answer that at the end. And then Sash Window Cambridge, what fees do you charge on 100% investor funded HMO JVs? I was thinking an acquisition fee of 2%, a PM fee of ? Refinance fee, any others? Would you say this fee structure changes for bigger projects? Yeah, good question. Actually, I had this conversation with one of our mentees this week. So yeah, we can answer that at the end as well. If you don't use Xero as your accounting package in your businesses, then you are missing out. We have a 50% off for your first 3 months offer via the link down below. So if you don't use, if you're using spreadsheets and you don't have a really good management system in place where you can very clearly see your up-to-date balance sheet, your profit and loss in monthly management accounts every month, a budget and a forecast, you need to be using something like Xero to get all of your accounting in line. And I guarantee it not only will, for the sake of, I think it's $20 or $30 a month, but I guarantee if you tell your accountant that you're using this type of thing, they will also charge you less because they know that everything's going to be organized in one place. Everything's reconciled against the bank. You're not handing them a shoebox of receipts to go through at the year end. Everything's kept tidily in this accounting software. So yeah, get your 50% off your first 3 months down below. So we've had a busy week this week. We've been all over the place, but on Monday we ventured into London, into Hackney. Very, very cool place. Way too cool for me. But we had a really good conversation for the Property Investors Awards podcast. What's the podcast going to be called? Can you remember?
I think it's just called Property Investors Awards.
Wasn't it like Behind the Deals or something? Anyway, whatever it is, it's coming out
it's soon. Only going to be award winners. Yeah, so it's a podcast that's going to be released purely for award winners and judges. Which Jack and I both are. In 2021 and 2022, we had various sort of finalists in various awards, and we also won 2 awards, which was an award for the best HMO project under 6 bedrooms, and also the best development of the year for our St Helens Mill project. Anyway, you'll get to hear all of the fun stuff that we talked about for a good hour and 20 minutes in about sort of 5-6 weeks time. We were the third people to be interviewed and third people to record on this podcast. Yeah, it was refreshing. We talked about all the different businesses that we run, some of the deals that we were awarded first place for all those years ago, and all of the intricacies of setting up business partnerships, going into multi-million-pound deals, social housing, and basically everything in between. It's hosted. It's hosted by sponsored by Away Wills, which is the company owned and run by Nelly, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know Nelly's surname, but she was an award winner back in 2019, I think, back in the days. 2017. 8 years ago. Yeah, very, very good host. Asked some extremely poignant questions around business, entrepreneurship, and property.
And yeah, when it's released, we will absolutely be shouting about it, because I think it was it was a great insight into what we've been building over the last 8 years, which is fantastic. And I think the one thing that I want to say about this is after 2022, and we won the property deal of the year, we were interviewed by Lizzie Warburton on behalf of the Property Investor Awards and Property 118 at the time. And that interview was watched by one of our now investors, who has invested close to over £1 million in our deals. And that's the type of thing that these types of awards, podcasts, the exposure you get from this type of thing can really do for you. So I want to give a big shout out to the Property Investor Awards. They will be releasing or opening the doors for 2026 nominations, I think in January. So if you've got a project, whatever kind of sector it's in, HMO, supported living, housing association, commercial, there's an awards category for everyone. So make sure that you're keeping an ear out, because the exposure you get from being in this type of thing, even being nominated for these types of awards, is fantastic. And Jack will be hosting the Property Investor Awards dinner next weekend. So I'm sure there'll be lots of good photos and stuff to come out of that. Cool. I wanted to talk about some of the questions that we ask when we recruit people, because I've been doing lots of interviews this week for XP Surveys. We are onboarding or trying to onboard a new CAD technician and a sort of junior surveyor. So that will be somebody that is probably 3 or 4 days in the office, post-processing the data from the surveyors on site, drawing in AutoCAD or Revit in terms of the output, and then delivering that to our clients, who are predominantly architects, but had lots of interesting conversations. And I just wanted to I'm sure, Jack, whilst I'm talking about my top 3, you might have a couple of extra ones that you can throw into the mix. But my top questions to ask in interviews, and the ones that I like asking, because it often gives me the most information back from the person I'm interviewing. So top question number 1 is, what do you see yourself doing in 3 years' time? Where do you see yourself being? What do you see yourself doing? What do you want to be doing? And that question for me is a really great insight in terms of a long-term fit for the business. One of the people that I interviewed this week, I'd say was doing really well until I asked this question, because ultimately their response to the question was that they want to be doing something or doing something that wasn't in our industry. So I'm like, well, if you're going to come and work for us, I don't want to be hearing that in 3 years' time or 2 years' time we're going to be saying goodbye to you. We want people to stay in the business, grow with the business, and become part of the furniture and build a fantastic career with inside our businesses. So I always like asking that. Why did you leave your previous role? Again, I think that can be a pro and a con for people, depending on the way they answer it. If they're answering it saying, look, I wasn't being challenged enough, or the business was taking a different direction, and I wanted to learn more, network more, bring in business, and my bosses didn't want me to do that. I'm like, well, we'd love you to have you on board. We want all of our team to be ambassadors for the business and grow, whatever role they're in. We want everyone to be trying to win work and win work into the business. So understanding why they're leaving is often a really good insight into that type of the mentality of that person. And this one, I've actually stolen this one, I think, from you, Jack. So sorry if this one was on your list, but it is, if I asked your colleagues what they would say about you, what would they say? I think, again, that's, insightful, because it's not necessarily what do you think your personality is like or your traits. It's what do your peers think? And I think obviously what your peers see of you may be slightly different to what you think of yourself. And it goes a long way to understanding what that type of character is. That's my top 3 questions. Jack, you got any more?
Yes. So I, after the colleagues question, I actually ask then immediately, because that kind of puts them off and think, oh God, what do my colleagues think of me? And if they say like hard worker, always doing whatever, that's great. If they're like joker or whatever, that's still not the end of the world. I also actually ask, what would your friends say about you? Because a lot of in small businesses, startup businesses, under 50 people, the personality and the culture of the person is really important. A question I love asking, and I think Ben actually asked this question as well. But just what do you think we do as a company?
Yeah, that's actually my opening question on every single interview.
Yeah, just so that you can set the scene of seeing if they've done their homework. I've had it before when people don't have a clue that they're even interviewing at this company. And I'm like, how the F do you expect us to be excited about hiring you? If you don't
that's happened in the last 2 weeks. 2 people have come on to, I think, and in all fairness to them, I mean, it's not, I'm making excuses for them and I shouldn't, but when I send out a meeting invite, it's often from my Aura Homes email address, because that's where my Teams is connected. And anyway, that's what my Outlook sends it from. So I think people see the email, and then when they jump on the call, they start talking about Aura, and I'm like, no, this is an interview for XP Surveys. The role that you've applied for is with XP Surveys, and because it's sort of CAD technician, there are crossovers, but you absolutely should be doing your homework. If you're interviewing for a role, even if it's 10 minutes before jumping on the call, get on the website, have a look. It shouldn't really be that difficult, but you're right. It shows a lot in terms of the capabilities of people to understand what they're getting into and doing a bit of research and actually showing that they're proactive. So yeah, that is something that I always ask at the very start of a interview. Anything else?
Yeah. Yes. Why are you right for the role? Really simple one.
Yeah.
Let them sell themselves a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's I think what we're talking about is intuitive, open questions to allow them to express themselves in the right way to tell you the right things. But there's obvious fact-find questions, which I'm sure we've gone through before, like current situation, notice, salary. Always talk through those things. People think, oh, should we talk about salary? But yeah, you've got to go through those things as well. But these are kind of like opening and teeing them up. As well.
I will always ask, what are your salary expectations? Because I think if you say, what salary you want, some people get defensive, or, I just feel like it's, when I've asked that question, more often than not, the response is, well, I'm currently on X, but I'm looking for Y. But almost straight out of the gate, the first thing that you hear is, what are they currently on, which then gives you a really good benchmark and baseline as to where you're positioning your job role. Cool. I mean, moving forward on to more XPS stuff, we are doing our third event of the year. I guess it is the third, on Wednesday, the 19th of November in the Hart Street Tavern in Henley-on-Thames. So if you are Oxfordshire based, or if you are not Oxfordshire based, we want to see you there. 4 o'clock until 7 o'clock. We provide the nibbles and the drinks. We'll have 2 speakers, which will be giving amazing insights into the whole sort of built environment space. We have got, I think, a fire suppression system company coming in to discuss all of the massive changes that have happened over the last couple of years with Building Safety Act and new regulations around fire. Every building control body that we work with is super, super keen and super, I've ranted about this in the past, but super hot on the whole fire strategy and how you are appeasing building regulations, etc. So sprinklers are going to become more and more prevalent in schemes that you work on. So make sure that you understand more about them. And if you want to understand more about them, come down to the Build and Bond event Wednesday, 19th of November. The other who did we end up going for in the end, Jack? The other speakers, the topics. Can you remember? Can't remember.
I don't actually know.
So we got sprinkler, and then I think it might be something to do with sustainability and all the other changes.
Yeah, there might also be a retrofit specialist coming in to talk about
retrofitting. Again, the existing housing stock is often quite leaky in terms of heat loss and things, and the building regulations are now very much pushing towards upgrading the insulation and fabric of the building. But there are ways that you should be doing that and ways that you shouldn't be doing that, and ways that actually, if you're retrofitting a property, you can do more damage than good by insulating on the internal walls, for example, with the wrong type of build up and the wrong type of materials. So hopefully we'll be able to secure that second speaker to talk about retrofitting, which everyone should know quite a bit about nowadays. I've got back just in from site. I've visited the old maltings today in Abingdon, which I haven't been to for, I think it might be 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and they're they're actually starting to make some good progress there. A lot of the flats are finished. They started building up the block work up to sort of window level on the 2 new builds. The glazing at the front of the property is pulled down, and they are starting to on Monday build the brickwork back up for the new facade, which is amazing. But I thought I'd share some photos of our Tame project, because I don't think we've showed much of the phase 2 works in this. So as you can see, for those that are tuning in on video format, we have 2 of the dormers on the roof, sort of semi-completed, so that the shell of them are up, and by sort of the end of next week we'll have a lot of the other dormers formed, and the structural work kind of undertaking internally. So all of the partitioning at ground floor and first floor is in. So it was actually great to go today, because it's the first time I've seen almost all of the flats laid out. So I could walk into a room. It was only stud work partitions up, but ultimately that then gives me the volume of the space that I'm walking into, looking at the floor plan, thinking, oh, the bed's going to go there. Have we got enough? Have we designed it so we've got enough room at the end of the bed? We got the TV, all of those things where I've seen it on paper, I've designed it with Aura, to then see it to come to life and be like, yeah, this is going to look really good, was a really nice feeling. And up in the loft, as it always is the case, on paper sometimes it looks smaller than it is, because you have to factor in the sort of low headroom of the sort of eaves. But when you're on site and you can see the height that the rafters go up to, the space feels loads bigger on site than it does necessarily look on paper. So those 2 penthouses are going to look sick. We've got all of the openings now formed in the envelope of the building. We've got windows being measured up next week for the fabrication, and we should actually have those windows delivered pre-Christmas. So by Christmas, I'm hopeful that we've got a watertight shell, and obviously the internals will be progressing with plasterboarding and first fix and insulation and whatnot as well. So yeah, super happy with how that's progressing, looking forward to sharing more as things do go on. Cool. Q&A. I think before we jump into the renters reform, which Dilly asked about last week, I'm just going to jump into the questions I think we can answer quite quickly that have come in during this session. So how much below market do you offer on houses suitable for HMOs, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to flip this question around a little bit. There is no blanket rule of how you should buy something below market value, because if you view 10 properties, some people might want guide price, some people might accept 5% less, and some people might expect 5% more. So essentially, with every property you ever buy, you should just be buying it for the lowest value that you can buy it off that particular person in that particular scenario. Then does it work for your numbers for an HMO is kind of the flip side of that. So there's no blanket BMV, whatever it may be. Every deal is different. We actually value all of our HMOs typically per bed. So what we're trying to buy it per bed, what we try and develop it for per bed, what we try and GDV valuation it per bed. So I know that in Abingdon, we can pay about 60 to 70K per bed to buy a property. Now that's, if it's a 3-bed, but I know it can be a 6-bed, that's how I value it on the end potential, the exit value. You're going to have to, it's finding needles in haystacks. So you're going to have to work hard for it, especially in this market, especially James, if you live in a high value area. We live in high value areas. They do come around, but they're not easy. Alternatively, you can look at lower capital value areas to make the process easier. I don't know how people make money on HMOs in London, if I'm honest. It's hard enough where we're based, let alone doing that type of business model in such a high capital value area. Even South London, where our social housing portfolio is, that's still 400 a square foot. So anything above like 500-600 a square foot, I don't really get how people make that work. So maybe relocate, maybe you've got to get offers out. Activity is important. The more offers you get out, the more likely you're going to find a deal, the more likely you're going to get a discounted deal, so on and so forth. And we sometimes do extensions or loft conversions, but typically I find it more cost effective if you've already got a badly laid out property that just needs repurposing and redesigning. that's the easiest way to get in and out, because you can typically turn a reno round in maybe 8 months maximum if you're using the 4 walls that are there. But if you're obviously doing rear extensions, side extensions, it adds time onto the build. And this whole business model is based on rent rolls. So not as much as you'd probably think, probably on 1 in 5 projects, maybe 1 in 4.
Nice. And on your last question about buying through auction, no is the very quick answer on that. I mean, I don't see how people make auction purchases work in general. If we're going to auction, it's because we're selling something, because we generally know that there'll be some idiot at the other end buying it for way over what anyone else is willing to pay. You know, we've seen things go at auction for values where, when you look at what we are buying it for and what we're planning to spend on it, people are buying those assets at that value. So I don't know where they're making any margin at all on those types of things. Maybe they're owner occupiers, or maybe they've got more cash than they know what to do with and just want to sit some money in some assets somewhere. I don't know, but we don't buy at auction. There's probably, like Jack says, a needle in a haystack where you find the right deal, something that's in an auction house that's way outside of the actual area that the property is. You know, nobody's looking at it from that particular area, and I'm sure there's opportunities out there, but we don't really touch auctions. What fees do you charge on 100% investor funded HMO JVs? I was thinking acquisition fee 2%, PM fee ? Refi fee ? I mean, on our developments, we generally have a 2% acquisition fee. We will charge something like 3% development management fee on the build costs and the development costs. We don't have a refi fee. But yeah, Jack, what do you do on your HMO portfolio?
HMOs, yeah. So there's 3 different fee structures. One is if we borrow capital from an investor and they're just on a straight fixed coupon, they don't ever own anything on the asset, we don't charge any fees because we're paying for their capital. And if we're charging a fee, it's just we're going to have to pay for that anyway. So if we deliver our own HMO with borrowed capital, there's 0 fees on it. And then they just get their cost of capital back. So they've invested and they get their capital and interest back. Then there's 2 different variations of our portfolio builder. So the 2 variations of our portfolio builder is A, the client owns all the asset themselves and they buy it, they fund it, they own it, and that's their asset. In that scenario, we typically charge 2% acquisition fee or £5,000, whichever is greater. We typically charge 15% project management fee or 15,000, whichever is greater. And then we do not charge a refi fee. We just charge a management fee. And then the last but not least is if it's a 50-50 JV with an investor, so they put in all the capital and we deliver it on a 50-50 joint venture structure, we halve all our fees. So it's 1% acquisition fee. It's 7.5% PM fee. And then it's a reduced management fee as well.
Cool. Nice.
And Michael's question come in.
Michael T. Sorry, I think I called you Tara earlier because your handle is Tara Tiom. But yeah, Michael T. Thank you. Is XP strategy still PD? Are you working on resi options with your new land director? So a lot of our stuff has been PD historically, or repurposing existing buildings of some kind. We've got a 17-unit housing scheme that we are actively looking at, and we're not against land deals. I think just because they take a lot longer. Finding those sort of off-market type land opportunities and negotiating them take a long time, and we haven't had necessarily the skill set to find those and do them specifically. But now we've got Stephen on board, who's our land manager. That's his background. He comes from more of a land side of stuff. So he's now actively looking for that whilst we're doing all of the other stuff in the background. So yeah, not against it at all. It's just, up to this point, it's been far easier and better for us to be to doing the PD stuff. Okay, so over to Dilly's question from last week. The renters reform is now law, but not in effect. How do you think it'll impact our business, Jack?
Yeah, so I'll try and rattle through all the major points as quickly as possible. So abolition of no fault evictions. Now, this is kind of almost semi in place. You can actually still serve notices to get rid of people to develop or refurbish properties. But essentially, most landlords typically, unless you're so if you're buying, you typically want vacant possession anyway, because otherwise you're going to inherit problems anyway. So if you own an asset, should you just want it rented out anyway? So it's there are other ways. So I don't think this is going to be as bad as a lot of people say. I know that a lot of people that have gone to get people out of properties, that actually quite frequently they don't go down via the Section 21 ruling. They typically use Section 8 or something else. So I don't think this is as bad as everyone's making it out to be, if I'm honest, with the no fault evictions. And typically there is a fault, if they're not paying rent, if they're damaging the property, there's typically reasons that you can get them out. Fixed term tenancies largely replaced by rolling tenancies. Again, maybe a little bit more frustrating if you're doing a larger housing scheme and renting to property people, but for HMOs it's typically pretty flexible anyway. Also, what you have to think about is security for the tenant as well. From the tenant's perspective, is that a good thing? If they have a lot more flexibility, normally when people move house, they want to have a foothold for a year or two or maybe 3. So I actually think that that's probably fairly negative for both the landlord and the tenant. Tenant's right to leave without notice. Tenant's right to leave with notice coming down to 2 months. For a landlord, that's probably enough time. The other way probably wouldn't be fair, because it does take a little bit longer to find a property if you're a tenant. Rent increases and bidding restrictions. Now, rent increases is a fairly difficult one, because we actually talked about this on the Ground Up podcast. Like if your utilities, your council tax, your everything, your insurance, your mortgage is going up, why shouldn't we be able to charge more rent? Because the problem comes, the free market dictates itself. If you're trying to overcharge, no one's going to rent from you. So the rental increases should be led by the pricing of the landlord. It's the landlord's choice. It's a bit like Gucci handbags. Someone picks the price of that. That doesn't mean you have to buy it. So the problem is the merge between housing as a person is obviously Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Everyone needs a roof over their heads, and I'm a massive advocate for that. Don't cut this and take this out of the wrong perspective. But equally, if you're pricing something wrong, that's your own fault, and people will not attract towards that property and go for market rate and others. So that is a difficult topic, because everyone should have housing, but equally we shouldn't be controlled as much to not allow rental increases, because all of our costs might have gone up. As a landlord, our costs have probably gone up 10% a year on average. So why could we not charge 10% more? And obviously you've got inflationary measures on top of that. So let's call that 17%. Why can we not increase our rent 17%? Because otherwise we're going to pull out of the rental market. We're not going to be landlords, and then there's lack of housing. Bidding restrictions is another one that pisses me off as well. So you're not allowed to rent. You're not allowed to rent for higher than your guide price, which just means landlords are going to guide a property at high. So all that's going to happen is the free market is going to, people are going to go and view stuff that's more expensive and out of their budget to make an offer, because they full well know if they want to rent something for 1,600 quid, the landlord can't say 1,600 quid and charge £2,000, but they can quote £2,000 and take an offer of 1,600 quid. So I think that's null and void, that one, if I'm honest.
Don't you think that's going to have the opposite effect? Because what's going to happen is that people will just start paying those inflated prices, and it's going to push the rental up.
Yeah, they counter each other, right? Yeah. I mean, one other thing that is frustrating about that is because people get into bidding wars and then they cannot actually sustain that rent. So their affordability doesn't cover it. So, well, don't fucking offer that amount if you can't afford it. Go and rent something you can afford. Equally, what's annoying is the funding gap in the market is people can't get on the housing ladder. So they're paying £2,000 per month in rent, but they can't get into £1,600 mortgage. But they've been paying rent for the last 10 years. So surely they can afford that mortgage at £2,000. So if the government just sorted out borrowing and made it easier for people to get onto the property ladder, this even wouldn't be a point. So yeah, completely agree with that. Landlord tenancy fairness and discrimination. Basically, you cannot discriminate. That's always been around, and you can't refuse people that have children, which I think is a little bit unfair. I personally feel that single mums is a very different story, but I think it's for families. I do think it should be landlord's consent to allow young children into a property, if I'm honest,
sorry, go on.
I was going to say, unless there's a shortage supply in that area. So if there's a surplus supply, people can choose. I don't want family in here. I want, a young professional couple and no kids, so my carpets don't get ruined. But if there's a shortage and people need housing, then I think we should be able, because we're now only allowed to charge 1 month's rent as a deposit. If you've got a 4-bedroom house that's renting for £2,000 per month, £2,000 doesn't touch the sides for the damage pets and kids could do. You might even need to refloor the whole building. Which
I was going to ask about animals. Is that because they were talking about
so it's slight. You can. I think you have. I can't actually remember the exact stipulation, but I think you have to be more welcoming with pets. But you don't have to allow them.
Yeah, good. I mean, I had a terrible experience with one of my rental properties where the dog just tore up the floors, tore up the sofas. Tore up the stairs. Ultimately that's going to fall back on the tenant in terms of holding back deposits and whatnot. But this particular tenant owed me £4,000 anyway, and ultimately didn't see a penny of that. So yeah, I'm glad that that's not being enforced. Like it should be. I think it's my house. I really don't see why the government have a say in who I let stay in it.
Yeah, I completely agree. The analogy I used the other day is it's a bit like imagine if you ran a car rental business and someone come in to use your car and they brought it back and it was dinged all over. They had worn the clutch out. It was covered in fag ash, and then they gave you the car back and you're like, brilliant. Now this is going to lose me money. I'm going to have to redo the whole car. And then if they came back in the following week and said, "Oh, I need the car again," you would tell them that they can't rent it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like when the problem we have is obviously we're trying to eradicate homelessness problems in the UK, which is one thing, but we're making it more difficult for the people that are already homed and the landlords that are already performing that. So it's pointing the gun in the wrong direction. It's not solving the problem. But that's pretty much it. And then obviously housing standards with AWAB's law, which is improving the standards of properties, which is kind of, I talked about institutionalization of renting anyway. And so essentially generally more security for renters, but it's more security for them getting removed and more rights around pets and protections of discrimination, more procedural burden and basically more regulation for landlords. And yeah, I mean, what do we make of it? I kind of feel like it's not much change to a tenant. And I always find the tenants that need evicting are the problem.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you're giving you're giving someone with a criminal record a crowbar rather than rather than helping the masses. You're making the people that are a problem more capabilities to be more of a problem because they're
giving them loopholes, right?
Exactly. It's very rare, someone's nan who is always been well behaved British advocate is being evicted because they're a problem. That doesn't happen. The people get evicted probably need evicting. So yeah.
I mean, just have one other thing in terms of Dilly asking how is it going to impact our business. It does make me want to move more towards sort of commercial property, commercial leases. So, like our social housing model, where effectively, for 5 years or 10 years or 25 years, you're giving a lease to someone else. They are effectively, operating and taking over that property on a maintenance perspective, full repairing and insuring. It's more sort of hands off, and you don't have to worry about all of this. This red tape that the government have brought in. And I think we will see a bit of a move to that. And we're already seeing it, to be honest, in the social housing space, but, moving away from that private rental market into a more social housing space where you can lease your properties to an operator. Cool. Well, we've rambled on for an hour and 10 minutes. So I think it's time to call it a day for this week's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please drop a thumbs up down below and subscribe. And if we can ask you to do just one thing, which will massively serve us and anyone you share it with, is to just share it into property groups that you're part of and share it with one person that you think would get value from it directly. So yeah, thanks very much. Have a good weekend, everyone, and speak to you next week. Bye.